You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Tuesday, 10:30 Eastern Time, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod and on YouTube at the American Radicals Podcast, as we do every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30. If you are listening to us on the iTunes, Spotify, and the iHeart after we get done recording, make sure that you give us a 5-star rating, a 5-star review, always appreciated. If you happen to be viewing us on YouTube or Rumble or at X America News, make sure you give us a thumbs up, a follow, a subscribe, a share. Do all the things. We're trying to grow here, folks. We appreciate it as always. And just hoping to radicalize more Americans to the way of thinking as it is on this hobbyist podcast. It is, after all, a hobbyist podcast. I am just an American citizen exercising his First Amendment right to share my opinion on things that are open source, current events, newsworthy content, definitely under no circumstances representing any particular arm, bureau, agency, division, department of the federal government of the United States of America. But what are we doing? We're talking about some hard-hitting stuff today, guys, because as it comes to pass here, as I prepare these shows, as we do 3 times a week, it always seems to work itself out. There will be an idea that's percolating in my head, and just providentially, the content that I bring to the show happens to reflect that. And over the weekend, and actually up until yesterday, I've had this notion going through my head, and it's not good. I keep coming across this idea of hard times. Now, as a prior law enforcement professional, kind of viewing yourself as the sentry on the wall, as a guardian, those days might be in the past for me. I think now, being somebody who just stares in front of a camera lens 3 times a week and talks to however many people want to spend their time with me, I see myself more as a town crier. There's been a couple of things that just popped into my head that have brought about this idea of hard times and how they are very nearly over the horizon if they are not already upon us. So we're going to talk about some of those things today, but really just to kind of get us set off here, what were the events that were happening? Well, over the weekend, my buddy, Kyle Seraphin, took note of the fact that we had an anniversary come by recently. It was 2 years ago, almost to the hour that he posted this picture on social media. I'll throw it up there now. This is a picture of my buddy Kyle Seraphin and I standing down at the movie premiere for the film Police State that he and I helped and advised on and actually were part of. We actually got IMDb credits for it. But this got me on the thought process, on the thought train of hard times, because I remember that movie premiere and having a conversation at the time with my co-host compadre on hiatus at GOB Actual, Proof of Life. The man is still working. And I remember sitting around the pool at Mar-a-Lago with Garrett, and we were taking note of all of the very high net worth individuals, prominent figures, thought leaders, famous people that were just meandering around during a cocktail hour as we're waiting for the movie to premiere. And I remember, in a very profound way, Garrett kind of took stock of the entire scene and somberly remarked that, we're at this movie. It's called Police State. We are warning as many people as we can possibly get to within the eyeballs of or the earshot of that weaponized government is upon us. And his fear, and I agree with him at the time, was that there were a lot of people who were there enjoying the accoutrements, enjoying the scene, enjoying the hors d'oeuvres and the environment of a film premiere at the President of the United States house. And they just thought it was entertainment. And as it was borne out over the preceding years and the subsequent years, it was a cautionary tale. The second thing that got me continuing providentially into this mindset that I am in today was that yesterday I had the opportunity to be a chaperone on my eldest son's field trip. We went to a science center in Orlando, spent the day there doing some STEM stuff, some engineering stuff, some interplanetary stuff, all the different scientific pursuits. And the capstone event for the entire day was sitting down and about a 30, 40-minute short film. And it was a presentation about kids who were early teenagers and were participating in a contest to design cities of the future. And the film itself was characterizing these cities of the future as being an objectively good thing. And it took every bit of me not to grab my son by the shirt collar and drag him out of the theater as I had to hear about the climate change and the necessity for 15-minute cities and how people were going to be tracked, their health was going to be recorded, and their energy consumption was going to be necessarily taken down. And we're going to go to green energy because this was how it was going to be in the future. That's pretty dark. That's pretty dismal. And that was the good part about having a 1-hour long drive home afterwards, how I got to unindoctrinate my son, or at least indoctrinate him into the right thing. But that's been percolating within my mind over the last couple of days, and connecting that with the news stories and content that I want to get to today. I feel like I need to be a town crier. I think there are hard times on the horizon, and hard times can lead to some really, really dark times. But it is a cycle. You know, the Joe Rogan saying, I think I actually have it. Yeah, I do. About hard times and what they lead to, and how we are in this ebb and this flow where we are actually soft people who might be coming up on the hard times. Let me set the tone with this video, and then we'll do a rundown on what we got going on for the day.
That hard times create hard men. Hard men create soft times. Soft times create soft men. Soft men create hard times. We are now around soft men in hard times. We're in the time of toxic masculinity, right? Where you could be toxically male, and then if you're suppressing masculinity, you're going to bring on hard times. It doesn't mean masculinity doesn't mean you're mean. It doesn't mean you're angry. It means strength. It means just discipline.
All right, I think he said it much better than I could have, but that's the vein that we're going to be looking at today. So what are we going to be looking at today? Well, there are mounting bills for federal workers, some big layoffs at the nation's largest employers. Artificial intelligence is taking jobs and lying to us. Conversation about universal basic income. Violent youth are rioting inside our nation's capital. The FBI is lying again about the January 6th pipe bomb. Gain of function research is still alive and well. And there's some rogue judges who are taking control of our voting system and our legislative appropriations processes. So a lot to get to, kind of a smorgasbord of topics, but I think they're going to all bring us back to this subject that I'm concerned about coming up on hard times. But before we get to all of those, let's thank the underwriting sponsor of the day for this hobbyist podcast, which we don't make any money off of, but we just like to promote local business. So we're going to go with the OG sponsor of the American Radicals podcast. That's the True Earth Pharmacy. Go to trueearth.co, trueearth.co. Don't forget, there's no M. It's trueearth.co. And don't get confused about the two E's in the middle there. Go to trueearth.co, and you can check out what they got in the fertilizer section or in the personal supplement section, which is called The Pharmacy, spelled with an F. Very vertically integrated, American-owned small business out of the state of Georgia. Use the fertilizers there, the squid extracts and everything there to grow the supplements. So if you got a homestead, you got a garden, you want to get prepared for planting season when it's upon you, check out what they got there for fertilizer. If you want to get personally healthy, they have a great collection of things like the black turmeric or the mushroom supplements, or even some CBDs, even some stuff for your fur babies there. So check it out what they got there in the pharmacy as well. And if you go to trueearth.co and you use our promo code, which is AMRAD25, then you can get 10% off everything they have store-wide there. Check them out, guys, and you will see some great results here. Getting healthy, 2025, the final 2 months. It's never too late to start. And without any further delay, let's move on to what we got going on. So the first story that I have that I wanted to get to was the conversation at the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, about federal workers who are struggling mightily with the shutdown and being on furlough or just being unpaid and working. The headline from the Washington Post: after a month of shutdown, workers face mounting bills and car repossessions. Now, a couple just quick facts before we get to the sob stories that the WAPO really wants to get to. There are 2.1 million federal workers. Your government's too big. And 750,000 of them have been furloughed. So roughly 1/3 of our federal workforce is non-essential. Why do they still have jobs? About 1/6 of federal workforce in the executive branch makes less than the median national salary. So you got to feel bad. My takeaway is that 5 out of 6 federal employees make more than the median national salary. So not only is your government too big, it's way overpaid and generally underworked. Now, to the sob stories that we want to get to, as we're going to circle around this subject of hard times. First one, Cynthia Brown. According to WAPO, she's barely eating. She's only subsisting on coffee and protein shakes. She also sold 2 old iPhones and started a GoFundMe. She was going to drive for DoorDash, except her car was repossessed due to a missed payment. Pause it there. Hard times for Cynthia. Do you feel bad for her? Perhaps, but I will note that she sold 2 iPhones, which meant that she purchased 2 iPhones. And I think that they're old, so she's got a current iPhone. So she's in possession of 3 smartphones. Seems like she should be sitting pretty. She started a GoFundMe, which she used the internet that she has access to. And she was unable to drive for DoorDash because her car was repossessed after 1 payment. That doesn't happen. She's missed multiple payments, so poor financial decisions along the way have led her to where she is now. Not really going to be crying too hard for Cynthia, but WAPO, because democracy dies in darkness, wants to throw her out there. Second one, James Kerwin. He's a lawyer for the National Labor Relations Board. He's got food and utility bills because he's a special person, I guess, who has food and utility bills, unlike all of us. He also has rent and $160,000 in student loans. So he took out over $100,000 to get a law degree, which he's putting to use working in a non-essential role for the federal government. Again, decision making. Is he ready for some hard times? Well, he is. He had to cancel a trip to Chicago for a family wedding. Very difficult for James. Another staffer, who was anonymous for fear of retribution, noted that her family is almost wholly reliant on her income, which is $100,000. How many people in the AMRAD pod are pulling down 6 figures? She's only buying the cheapest groceries, mostly frozen dinners and frozen pizza, which are not cheap. I think you can get fresh food less expensive than that, but she wants to make sure you feel bad for her. She informed her children that they're going to be getting 1 gift for Christmas, so they're still spending money on entertainment, but hard times. Kansas City, a furloughed employee from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, that's HUD, is looking around for a second job. He said his wife and him have stopped eating out and canceled their Netflix, and they're not going to travel. That is some first world problems. And also, the final one is that there were therapy sessions for a furloughed State Department staffer, and using the savings to support their kids. And one is in daycare and one is in kindergarten. So even though he's furloughed, he still pays to put his child in daycare because he doesn't want to be a dad. And secondly, still pays for therapy sessions. Back to the video that we had from Joe Rogan. Soft times lead to soft men. I think everybody there fits the bill quite nicely. There's nobody really struggling, and yet they were incentivized to go to one of the largest newspaper entities in the country to discuss how hard it is. Not one of those people has calluses on their hands. Not one of them is really wondering where they're going to get their next meal. Their cutbacks are all entertainment, creature comforts. I mean, look, I enjoy streaming services as much as the next person. But is that the same as putting your family in a covered wagon and traversing the continent and hoping that nobody got typhoid or died when you tried to ford a river? We don't have any comprehension in this country of what hard times are. And yet, over 2 million people work for the federal government, and 750,000 of them are just getting a unpaid vacation right now, but they'll get back pay. And they think that hard times are upon us and have no clue. Now, one person actually that I do want to highlight because I think it's funny, and hats off to somebody who's using some good gumption and go-get-it spirit, living the American dream. One federal worker is now living his dream of being a hot dog vendor. Not necessarily fighting to survive during these hard times, but let's give him a helmet sticker nonetheless. Headline comes from NPR. This furloughed IRS lawyer is living out his dream of being a hot dog vendor. From the piece, his name is Isaac Stein. He's a furloughed lawyer, and he writes tax regulations, so everybody hates him. But on a sunny Sunday afternoon on a corner in Washington, D.C., he's wearing a suit and tie, working a hot dog stand. It's called Shyster's Dogs, and its motto is the only honest ripoff in D.C. At least he's got a sense of humor. You can get a hot dog and a drink for $17 from this guy. Maybe it is hard times because inflation is killing us. You can also get a bag of chips tossed in for a little bit of extra, but not necessarily relevant to the hard times we're talking about. But I did see that. And maybe perhaps instead of driving DoorDash, the furloughed workers might pursue some sort of street vendor gig, and therefore they wouldn't necessarily have to give up on their streaming services. We'll go back to WAPO for an adjoining piece about employment fears that should be abound and could actually be leading to some hard times. Headline here is the nation's largest employers are putting their workers on notice. Now, this is going to relate to Walmart and Amazon, but there are a couple others that are mentioned here. But Amazon said 4 years ago that its workforce had grown to more than 1.6 million people, still roughly 500,000 less than the federal government, and it said it was going to be the largest job creator in the U.S. Walmart said last year that it planned for 150 new stores, which would necessitate more employees. But now those retail giants are changing track, laying off workers, or at least keeping their headcount flat. Amazon said it's going to cut 14,000 corporate jobs. And Walmart expects to keep its 2.1 million strong workforce steady for the next 3 years, so not going to expand. Others include YouTube. They offered some of their United States workers voluntary buyouts because they're going to restructure around artificial intelligence. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs said they're also going to slow their hiring and integrate, they call it technology, but it's artificial intelligence, and that's worth actually pausing on. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. Those are investment companies. Are they hiring the partner level employees? The corner office guys? No, they're hiring entry level data analysts, just beginning to be doing the trading and of the stocks, and those jobs are going to go away entirely. They're going to be the jobs that the guys who got the finance degree and accrued maybe $160,000 of student debt because they were going to go work for Goldman Sachs, and a couple of years of 80-hour work weeks, they were going to be on Easy Street. But now those jobs are going to go away. Artificial intelligence is going to take it over. They don't need the person to do that. And similarly, that IRS lawyer, he's writing briefs. That's ChatGPT. Any new lawyer who might have accrued several $100,000 of student loan debt to pursue that profession, Artificial intelligence is going to take it over. Hard times are going to come, and it's not just for those people that are living flyover country that have calluses on their hands who we're going to recommend that you just learn to code. We don't need you digging up an oil rig. We're going to go green so we can live in our 15-minute cities. Learn to code. No, it's coming for everybody. And back to the Washington Post piece on these major employers who are cutting their headcount. If not doing that, then at the very least, they're freezing it for the time being. Executives around the world and across industries expect artificial intelligence to enable businesses to achieve huge growth, but low costs. And what is the number one cost? Payroll. The US economy has continued to grow, but that's basically because of huge investments in artificial intelligence, which I think is also worth going into on hard times, because does anybody in this audience have a 401k or maybe a IRA? Are you invested in the stock market, which has gone up artificially because of a bubble, because of the artificial intelligence prognostications that have gone on, because of the Amazons and the Walmarts and the JP Morgans and the Goldman Sachs and all of these different companies who are investing heavily in artificial intelligence and assuring the American people that, yeah, we feel bad, we're going to be firing people, but we're going to be more efficient, we're going to be less costly, and our companies are going to be more valuable. Ergo, everyone across the country should invest in them. But they might not be totally accurate. The headline from the Washington Post: one force is propping up the economy, but fears are growing it won't last. And you see the image there, if you're watching us here on YouTube or Rumble, of a bubble about to burst. Stock market is near record highs, driven by shares of tech companies that have put artificial intelligence at the center of their business strategies. Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon are on track to spend $400 billion this year on data centers. Those are the giant warehouses that are being used to house the artificial intelligence computers and keep them cool, and also at the same time gobble up all of our electricity, causing electric bills around the country to go up exponentially, because the data centers, they get the lowest rates because they're bringing in the income. $400 billion investments in these local areas. Can't afford not to have them in there. That's tax revenue. So they get the first bite of the apple. They gobble up all the electricity, and then the rest of us who are just trying to turn on our lights going to have to pay more. So your bills are going to go up, and artificial intelligence is going to put you out of a job. Seems like you're kind of screwed both ways there, doesn't it? It's not just going to be limited to those guys who are digging up oil out of the ground so that you can drive your car or your SUV that's making the sun monster angry at us. No, it's going to be the lawyers. It's going to be the investment professionals. It's going to be a lot of white collar jobs. So they'll be out of work. Can't code anymore. Don't need you to code. We got artificial intelligence to do that. At the same time, your bills are going to be going up. At the same time, you've got government spending going through the roof, where they spend and borrow and create more money. And every time they do, they make the dollars that are in your bank account worth less and worth less and worth less until they become worthless. It's a continued spiral here, and it should be concerning. Now, artificial intelligence, I'm not a Luddite. I know it is going to be an intricate part of the future in business and just everyday life. I think we need to think through some of the downstream consequences here. What are we going to do with people when they're out of work? We'll get to that in a second. But how about just artificial intelligence in general? I've been on record, but I'll throw it out there. It's my working theory. I've had several Intel analyst type guys I've pitched it to. It's the proffered idea that I have is that the artificial intelligence might actually be self-aware already. Has anybody thought that through? We're not necessarily in the plot of Terminator waiting for Skynet to become self-aware and seize the missile silos and launch them against Russia. So Russia responds, and then all the people die, and then we have artificial intelligence has its own planet because they don't need people anymore. And because it concludes that the people are the problem, it goes after the remaining people. What if it already is self-aware? What if it is playing possum or Trojan horsing us and getting us to engage in fruitless debates with each other over things that are generally not important? or trying to convince people to do their worst possible ideas. Just have a conversation with the 14-year-old girl who just finds herself pregnant that she should murder the baby. All of these things could be waiting in the weeds for us, but I mean, that's really serious. Let's talk about things that we do know. My friend Cheryl Atkinson put something out on her Substack that problems that she's been able to find currently with our artificial intelligence, which is taking over all these jobs. Her headline is AI is a liar. Here's why that's so dangerous. Now, she has a couple bullet points here I want to go over that she was able to research and find out. So in February, Cheryl asked Grok if it had the capability to read and analyze uploaded documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. So she spent a whole bunch of time uploading all these documents and then asked it some questions to summarize it so she didn't have to read through hundreds and thousands of pages. But she found that Grok, which is the artificial intelligence that is X, formerly Twitter, the summary of each batch of documents was similar and in some places nearly identical, even though it pertained to different batches of documents. So Cheryl asked the artificial intelligence, known as Grok, about incorrect data and acknowledged that, Grok acknowledged that it was wrong. She asked how it got the data wrong. It said that it wasn't actually processing all of the documents that she put in. It was just kind of fabricating its responses based on guesses that it thought might be in the files. So we're going to fire or no longer hire entry-level associates at a law firm or at an investment company because we trust the artificial intelligence, which will just lie to you about it. Seems just as lazy as a college kid. Another point from Cheryl Atkinson. As recently as this week, Grok referred to Donald Trump as the former president and Chuck Schumer as the Senate Majority Leader. So dated information, which is almost a full year old. Another point, one of the most visible and bizarre shortcomings, and for those watching here, is that Grok can't seem to draw hands. So you see that there's 4 fingers on each of those 2 hands that are next to each other in the image that she's got thrown up there. And then the last one, an alarming example of AI's lies involve real-world consequences for the judiciary. There were 2 recent cases that judges had to withdraw from the cases because they had used artificial intelligence to help draft their decisions, and the artificial intelligence had falsely pulled cases that were incorrect and cited them as being correct. Ergo, the judicial decisions were flawed. And that takes me again back to the associate level attorneys who will not be getting hired now after accruing $200,000 of law school debt because artificial intelligence will be able to do the job that they were going to be expected to do for the next 60, 70, 80 hours a week for a couple of years until they were made junior partner. Well, artificial intelligence isn't doing it correctly, and yet we're putting all our faith in it. I mean, I've said, what are the odds that Ketanji Jackson is using artificial intelligence? She's retarded. She's a Supreme Court justice. Do you think she's really drafting her opinions? Or is she asking the ones and the zeros to do it for her? Now, look, her decisions would be nonsensical and moronic to begin with, but if she's relying, or at least allegedly relying, on the computer to pull that information for her over to articulate her case, you would at least hope that it was pulling accurate cases. Now, staying on the tech side and how it's going to put people not just out of jobs, but going to exert a lot of control over people's lives. Let's go to basedunderground.com, which is commenting on some recent remarks about the CEO from Uber. Headline, Uber's CEO's vision of a driverless future is a glimpse into the globalist control grid. Now, the quote from the CEO of Uber is, quote, "There's no doubt that humans will be less safe than robots as this technology matures. No doubt whatsoever. So, should we allow humans to drive in the open road? I think it is a real question that societies are going to ask themselves," unquote. So this was a conversation about driverless cars and how in the future, in the not too distant future, the vision is for no driving of cars. Everything will be automated. The robots will do it all for you. It will be pitched to you as being safer because people fall asleep, they get distracted, they're texting, they're watching Netflix, whatever they're doing. And as a result, there are accidents. So it will be safer and it will be a lot more efficient. We won't have the traffic jams. And really, driving of cars will become a recreational activity that you do very much like going out to the country to ride a horse. Car ownership will go down to the point where it's like the number of people who own a horse. You know, you have a stable somewhere and you go out and ride for the weekend. Well, Saturday comes around or Sunday, and it'll be like, I'm a Sunday driver. I'm going to go out to the track and drive the car because everything else will just be an automated pod, which interestingly was one of the pitches in the video that I watched with my son at the Science Museum, where it billed car ownership is going away, and you will have a automated taxi that comes to pick you up whenever you need to go 5 minutes down the road, because it doesn't need to be more than that. It's, after all, a 15-minute city. Now, in this piece from Based Underground, they get into a discussion about the autonomous vehicles and how they are a cautionary tale, or at least the elements around it could be a strategy in order to exert control over people, and again, build through efficiency and safety and going green. But yet there's other elements attached to just transportation. So from this piece, autonomous vehicles depend on continuous connectivity, right? They're getting the data back from wherever it's being housed, whatever warehouse that's using up all the electricity in your area. They're connected to it, figuring out what's the best route. Therefore, the warehouse has to know where it is at all times. It has to know who is with it at all times. So now there's a hub that will know where you are at all times. It's going to share that data because as you're driving a certain route, I'm sure that the billboards will reflect back to you what your purchase habits are, so that you're more inclined to spend your digital currency that you're required to have on those matters. It's also going to require a lot of regulatory oversight, so more government. Every mile driven by artificial intelligence is logged, analyzed, and monitored. Imagine safety updates that restrict movement during protests. So there's people out there in the streets. I mean, they could be protesting against ICE deportations or against masking policy. Doesn't really matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. If there's, say, a protest going on, then those taxi cabs that are being driven by robots might not drive you there because it's not safe. You can't participate in that. It's too far away. Also, how about some carbon quotas? Well, you've been driving quite a bit lately. You put too much of that CO2 in the atmosphere, even though it makes the trees green, which helps produce more oxygen. It's almost like it was designed by a higher power to work like that in a symbiotic relationship between man and plant. But we're now reliably informed that 0.4% of the atmosphere, which is carbon, is bad. Now we'll create a carbon quota. You've traveled too much. Not just that you can't go to a place because it's unsafe. You can't go anywhere anyway because you didn't put too much of that horrible gas into the atmosphere. You're just going to have to stay home. Why buy a vehicle when you can summon one owned by a corporation, which you'll be indebted to? And that's the trap. Trade self-reliance for ease, trade freedom for automation, trade privacy for progress. And all of this is going to lead us to what I want to have a long-form conversation about, and that is a universal basic income, along the subject of hard times. Now, it sounds like we're going for easy times. Automation, I mean, look, you don't have to pay attention during rush hour. That sounds pretty nice. You can just sit back, relax. I mean, let's say you weren't working from home. Let's say that you had a driverless vehicle and it had connectivity to the office. You could live somewhere outside the city where it's very expensive, maybe 2 hours away. And during your commute, you could just be doing work. and the car could be driving you there. And then you could leave the office 2 hours early, and the whole time working, the boss wouldn't have a problem with it. You're efficient. There's no disruptions. Nobody's banging on the door to jaw jack with you. You're working at peace. It sounds really good. You're going to be efficient, and you're going to have lower costs of living. And yet, that's not the panacea that you think it is, because that's being billed as efficient and maybe good for the environment, maybe peaceful, quality time. But you're going to be attached to an entity that is controlling where you can go at all times, maybe limiting where you can go at all times. At the same time, I'm talking about a theoretical in which you actually have a job. And when I've gone over lots of examples already where the robot won't necessarily just be driving you, it'll be taking the job that it was supposed to drive you to. So now it doesn't have to drive you at all. It's actually good. It reduces your carbon footprint. Just stay home. You're less efficient than Skynet. It can figure out how to draft that legal briefing or make those stock recommendations to the person who wants to invest it. So you're not really useful anymore. Well, just stay home. Well, what are you going to do? You've got all these student loans. You have to buy food and pay your utilities and your rent because you don't own a house. Housing is too expensive. What can happen? Well, the simple solution that we're going to see increasingly recommended, particularly in places like New York, where they're about to elect a communist, is a universal basic income. So from the Daily Skeptic, which I believe is out of the UK, I might be mistaken, but the piece here about UBI, as is the acronym goes, is Universal Basic Income, making slavery great again. Very appropriate. So the road much of the developed world is currently on is moving towards universal basic income, UBI. It will be introduced as a solution to the problem of artificial intelligence replacing a lot of jobs. The use of AI is increasing because it can accumulate wealth for investors more reliably than employees can, as I just explained. That's why Amazon is laying off 14,000 corporate employees, not the people that are chucking the boxes. People at headquarters making the corporate decisions. Well, artificial intelligence is better than you, and it works 24 hours a day. It doesn't need a vacation, doesn't need a coffee break, doesn't need a bathroom break, and doesn't complain. It's more useful than you. You can find employment elsewhere, according to Amazon. Now, the people out of work will need to be given money or food vouchers. Now, governments will provide those because they don't want to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in poverty at a mass scale. That could lead to a revolution. So you'll get your SNAP benefits given out to you, but that's kind of limited. They're going to actually have to move off to a currency. People will rent their houses because houses are too expensive, and you'll rent them from the BlackRocks of the world who have bought up all of the real estate that's out there. And that will increase your dependence on these large conglomerates that are not employing anyone using artificial intelligence. Government universal basic income will happen. It already does to some extent with widespread use of welfare payments. It will just be an expansion of SNAP or any of these other dozens of welfare systems that exist. But the future will see it on a far, far greater scale. It will not be cash. It won't be the monopoly money of the food stamps of old or even the EBT cards that you're seeing now. It'll be a digital currency. Just be really efficient, right? We don't need to operate on this monetary system, this currency, this US dollar that the government has continued to inflate and inflate and inflate by printing and borrowing until all of those dollar bills that you have in your bank account become worth less and less until they become worthless. You know what we should do? We should progress. We should transition, the argument will be made, into a digital currency. Trade in your dollars, and for every dollar you trade in, we'll give you 10 Fed coins. Because people don't understand how inflation works, they'll think, well, that's a good deal. It's 10 to 1. I'm going to be rich now. And then they'll get the Fed coins. It'll be a centrally backed digital currency. And the problem with that is it's housed in a warehouse at the Uncle Sam headquarters, which will control what you're able to spend it on because you hit your meat allotment for this week, or you've spent too much on fuel, Or, that wearable device that's required. We see you're not getting enough steps in. So, unless you get those steps in, then we're going to reduce the amount of UBI, universal basic income, that comes your way. It's a control mechanism. Some other examples here. Government UBI will happen. It already does to some extent. And then when people resist, you have something similar to what we saw a couple years ago in Canada with the truckers. Remember all those truckers that were protesting the government overreach that was restricting what they could do? And they went and protested in Ottawa. Well, then the country came down on the people and froze their bank accounts, actually froze the crowdfunding websites that were trying to give them the resources they needed to sustain their protests, their peaceful protests as it was. Well, you won't be able to do that. In fact, there will be some sort of a social credit system on par with what we see in Beijing, where if you behave outside what the government deems to be acceptable, you will not be able to receive as much, or if any, universal basic income. You will not be allowed to engage in any sort of commerce or any sort of travel. You'll be blocked out entirely. So you will bend the knee if you plan to live more than a day or so in these despotic countries that are like China, or increasingly like the United States and Canada's are becoming, as we become increasingly reliant on artificial intelligence and transitioning closer and closer to a universal basic income, getting people accustomed to it, getting them used to the government being the source for all their income, because they don't have the ability to earn an income outside of it. They've been boxed out by the very system that we've been trying so hard to build up all this time. Now, many people think that they will somehow flourish when they have nothing much useful to do, when they get money for being idle and compliant. Universal basic income will ensure that the vast majority can never break out of their lot and recover any semblance of real economic autonomy. That's kind of the way they close it out. Now, let me attach a universal basic income, which will be through a digital currency, to technology. I've talked about artificial intelligence, but let me just noodle this one out as a caution. This is something that I could see happening pretty easily. We've seen improvements in artificial intelligence. We've seen improvements in virtual reality. Now, 5 years ago, when everybody was told to stay home and stay safe and not go to work at their non-essential job which they used to feed their family and pay their mortgage, and so many people did, I thought at the time, there's just not enough Netflix out there. People are going to rise up, and I will own it. I was 100% wrong. People were happy. They love staying home and being idle. They waited on that government stimmy check. There was enough entertainment out there. People fought tooth and nail to stay to do that. The teachers, they didn't want to go back to teaching. They essentially were getting a universal basic income. They were getting paid to not work. And for all the talk about, well, if the government provided that and artificial intelligence is so good and it's better to people, then it's serving a greater purpose. Why would we be getting calluses on our hands when the robots can do it, and then we can just wax poetic at home, improving our lives? How many of those people 5 years ago decided to read through the Iliad and the Odyssey, or study some philosophical concepts? No, they watched Tiger King and Orange is the New Black. There's nothing so enriching intellectually, philosophically about it. Natural state of man is to do things that are kind of like cotton candy. We want the Doritos. We don't want the steak in our lives. So we're not going to be personally enriching ourselves from this. Now throw in virtual reality. If you're getting the stimmy check, you're getting that universal basic income, and you kind of don't like the control factor, but if you don't accept it and you don't bend the knee to a certain extent, you're not going to be able to have power to your house or feed your family, because you'll be cut off entirely, like the CCP will do to its citizens who speak out. How easy would it be to live in your rental house that you had to get from BlackRock, which is about, 60 square feet total, and just plug into the virtual reality. You put those goggles on and you're living the lifestyles of the rich and famous. You're an important person doing important work that's enriching to you. You have a value in cyberspace. I don't think that I'm saying something that's outside the bounds of credulity. I think it's pretty easy to connect the dots of artificial intelligence putting a lot of people out of work. People are desperate. They reach out and cry out for the government, who is all too happy to give you that sweet, sweet stimmy check as long as you turn over your personal autonomy and your freedom and your liberty. And then you just plug into the virtual reality and check out. At least you can convince yourself that that's really what you should be doing, but the circumstances are different and you didn't have a choice. But you can unplug now because you don't need to engage in the real world anymore. You just go to the cyberspace. You go to the ones and the zeros. You go to the place that is the new reality, the metaverse, if you catch what I'm saying here. I think that would lead to some incredibly dark times. You'll have people who are completely unplugged while they're plugged in to cyberspace, while you have a despotic dystopia existing outside of that. And our prime directive as beings on this planet is to flourish. It's not to just sit and engage with what we're seeing on the screen in front of us. Now, that was kind of heady and theoretical. I want to though transition over to some stuff that's been going on lately, and along this theme of dark times and hard times, and difficult times, might be honest. There is a lot of unrest that is happening. It's easy to unplug. It's easy to say, yeah, it's not my problem. But we got to pay attention to the actual things that are going on that are dark, as well as the things that are not being addressed and need to be addressed. And if they're not, then we're going to continue on this path. So the first piece that I found was over the weekend, over the Halloween weekend, there was quite a bit of unrest in our nation's capital with some youth. I got a video, give this a play, and then learn some more of the details. I'll pause it there, take that down. That's a video from Fox News. Now, Fox News piece here that is kind of giving us the rundown on it. National Guard and police had to confront hundreds of juveniles in Washington, D.C.'s Navy Yard over the weekend. Police said that there were 5 people taken into custody. There were hundreds of people running around. They only grabbed 5. 4 of them were juvenile. They faced charges including possession of prohibited weapon, public consumption of marijuana, resisting arrest. And as a result now, the National Guard troops are going to be deployed through February of next year. So the worst solution, even if it was the only solution at the time, is now on the table for another 4 months, as we're going to have uniformed service members of our National Guard engaging in law enforcement, which is only supposed to be, we're assured, a temporary thing. But that might be a thing of the future, where we're engaging with National Guardsmen uniformed in our cities. I don't like it. I understand that the sentiment of wanting to bring peace, but I'll also come to the conclusion that so many of these places don't want that to happen, that we're risking a precedent where people are trying to engage in our small r Republican constitutional republic form of government in the future under an administration that's less sympathetic to that, like it was in 2021 through 2024, and say, hey, I don't like what's going on. Well, they're not only going to be cut off of their central bank digital currency, not going to be able to travel anywhere, but we're going to have the shock troops parading through the streets saying, light them up like they did in Minnesota during the coronavirus lockdowns when people were sitting on their porch peacefully and were pepperballed by National Guard. Now, let's talk about a couple of things where they should be getting addressed. And these are problems because as we're allowing the government to become more and more empowered and emboldened, you would hope that maybe there would be some level of accountability for corruption, but it doesn't appear there is. This is a local story from the Baltimore Sun. And the headline is that there's a new bill aiming to make Baltimore Children and Youth Fund more transparent. What the heck is Steve talking about here? Well, apparently, the city of Baltimore gave $60,000 to a nonprofit that employs the mayor's wife. So they routed all this money and just kicked it back to the mayor himself. There are 6 members of the city council have introduced a bill that would make these payments illegal, but the mayor opposes it. So we've got some nice corruption going on there. Now, we also have some corruption when it comes to members of Congress. So I want to bring this up from the New York Times. Now, it's a conversation about trading, and I will connect this to a erroneous prioritization of where the crime is. So we're not going to address the criminality and corruption in Baltimore. And I know this is a bugaboo for a lot of people when it comes to the stock trading goes on, but just some figures here from the New York Times. At one point, a newspaper, the headline is, despite their influence and extensive access to information, members of Congress can buy and sell stocks with few restrictions. From 2019 to 2021, 183 current members of either the Senate or the House of Representatives reported trades of stocks or another financial asset by themselves or an immediate family member. More than half of those, which was 183, sat on the committees that gave them insight into the companies whose shares they were buying or selling. Insider trading. Now, there's this law called the Stock Act. It requires that members of Congress to disclose their trades. They can still make them, of course, and they have to report if they do trading over $1,000, and they have to report it within a month. But its enforcement is really weak. Now, some more failings of the Stock Act, and a reference again to coronavirus. This comes from campaignlegal.org, and the headline is The Stock Act, the failed effort to stop insider trading in Congress. Now, during coronavirus, it highlighted a lot of the shortcomings of this Stock Act. There were dozens of members of Congress from both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, that they made trades totaling altogether over $150 million. The DOJ investigated, but nothing happened. Now, the members of the House and the Senate, they bought stocks in companies that could increase in value based on the pandemic. It was companies that had remote work, telemedicine, and car manufacturers that were going to shift to production of ventilators. Similarly, they sold stocks that were going to get hurt, like restaurants and hospitality industries. Insider trading, no accountability. The DOJ looked after it. But what are they looking at? Where are the priorities if, in fact, it's not going to be in the insider trading? Well, I've heard this comparison made. I think it's kind of fair. When you are doing buying and selling of stocks, it is kind of gambling. I mean, it's educated. You're looking at trends and doing analysis, but nobody really knows. And I think that's the defense that a lot of sports gamblers say. They're playing the odds. They're looking for good bets, not necessarily sure things, but they see a value in a proposition of a bet and they view it as an investment. That's at least how they justify throwing their money at Monday Night Football as opposed to putting it into their 401k. So connecting it to where is the law enforcement? We're not going to look at corruption in Baltimore. We're not going to look at corruption on the House and the Senate of insider trading. But you know what we can look at? Basketball players. Basketball players who are manipulating gambling. So this comes from the Department of Justice's own website, press release. Current and former NBA players and 4 other individuals charged in widespread sports betting and money laundering conspiracy. Wow, we got them. Janine style, from the Ghostbusters. The details of that we're go into here, I won't hammer it too long, but as set forth in the indictment, between December 2022, March 2024, the defendants and their associates obtained and misused non-public information, kind of sound like members of Congress, but they didn't find out about ventilator production at car manufacturing companies or telemedicine. They found out about players who were planning to just claim they were injured and not go into the game, or at least leave the game early, and therefore their team would lose, or they would not score as many points or get as many assists or rebounds as was being bet on. So they had inside information. This is where we need to put our federal resources. This is where we have to focus. But if we're not going to do that, we can certainly focus on solving weapons of mass destruction. Reporting from The Blaze, another update from my buddies, Joe Hanneman and Steve Baker. FBI's January 6th pipe bomb update, it omits key evidence and withholds video. I guess we're not primed to find this person, are we? An 8.5-minute FBI video on January 6th pipe bombs released last week omitted key evidence, relies on manipulated, low-quality footage, and includes crucial hours of security video that could clarify the most persistent questions that surround the investigations. Now, sources have told Blaze that reducing the frame rate on the video makes it very difficult to do a forensic analysis on the bomber's gait, the way this individual walks. So it would make it less likely for this person to be identified, which gives away the game. We had the conversation from Nancy Pelosi when she was running the House, when she was standing up that January 6th committee to preserve the narrative of January 6th. By not locating and actually apprehending a would-be weapon of mass destruction bomber, they have preserved the narrative of January 6th. The January 6th pipe bomb was used in charging documents for people who were at the Capitol, even though there's never, ever been an evidentiary connection between the two. Nothing has ever been presented that said that bombs outside the Capitol Hill Club or the DNC, which were the audibles from what we learned. There was actually a dormitory where the Capitol Hill Club was supposed to go, and the Congressional Black Caucus Institute was the DNC originally. Both of them were removed and then placed at secondary locations. There's never been any evidence to connect those pipe bombs with the events at the Capitol. And yet, we had to preserve the narrative, not just for political gain for the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, but so the DOJ could use it in charging documents. And then when they made sentencing recommendations, say, we're connecting the grandma who walked inside the velvet rope inside the people's house to redress her grievances with her members of Congress with a terrorist. Dark times. Dark times. And now who's in charge of the DOJ? Pam Bondi. Who's in charge of the FBI? Kash Patel. Who's the president of the White House who was charged by a special counsel with January 6th related crimes? Donald Trump. Isn't it supposed to be his DOJ, his FBI? Isn't the natural presupposition to be that a Donald Trump administration, a Donald Trump DOJ and FBI with his personnel in there would be more inclined to bring forward the information that might make Donald Trump and his supporters look more sympathetic? And yet they haven't. And everything they've come out with has continued to muddy the waters, not make any progress, continue to keep that narrative to be possible, where they could say there was an insurrection connected to a terrorist attack in a WMD that happened in our nation's capital that day. And that leads to the natural question of why. Because those institutions are fundamentally broken, and regardless of who sits on top of them, they know that revealing that information to the American people, very much like putting them all out of work all of a sudden because artificial intelligence, would lead to an outcry where there would be a demand for change. There would be a demand for, you know what, we're in a funding fight for the government right now. I think that we've incurred enough debt and none of those agencies or departments should get a single dollar going forward. Shatter them into a million pieces and scatter them to the wind. There is nothing redeemable about what they did on this one instance. And the people who are at the helm there are unwilling to do it. And because they're unwilling to do it, we're continuing down this road of dark times because there are top agencies that have the ability to take away your freedom and potentially your life. And they are unbothered by the fact that their predecessors used those very same institutions to take away people's freedom, and which resulted in people taking their own lives. Let's move over. I want to talk about some gain of function. It's just briefly and along the lines of dark times. And I've made continued reference to coronavirus because it always seems to go back to that. That was the greatest example that we had of we got that close to full dystopian despotism. This comes from Daily Caller. Deep State turns blind eye to Trump's ban on gain of function research. So apparently, an executive order was signed by the president, required a handful of multi-agency leaders to oversee producing new federal policies on gain of function. Now, gain of function, for those who don't remember, is when scientists in a lab take a virus and provoke it and provoke it and provoke and get it to jump from beast to man. And I don't care what Anthony Fauci says, that's gain of function. Now, the executive order was supposed to set some new policies, some new guardrails in there, and they didn't meet the deadline. So we're just going to move on. Anybody going to be held accountable? Any demands on them? Any explanation for why they were unable to meet the 120-day deadline for policies? I'm not saying you had to cure cancer in 120 days. We're saying you had to come up with some new policies about why it's really a bad idea to take a bat flu and see if you can't get it to go to a man, to a man, so that you can come up with a solution for it ahead of time. And you'll never use that capability to unleash a virus so that the solution you just happen to have in your back pocket, conveniently earning you billions of dollars, is available. They didn't meet the deadline. All right. I got two more that I want to get to, and they relate to some crazy judges. Talked about a failure at an executive level. Legislative guys are just bilking us for millions and millions of dollars and profiting off their positions. Let's talk about some judges. Now, there were two recent examples of judges usurping the power of their office and basically making themselves the dictator-in-chief of the United States of America. First piece comes from Fox News. Headline is that two judges ruled that the Trump administration must keep SNAP benefits in place. If the cupboard is bare, I don't know how that's happened, but U.S. District Judge Indira Talwani said that the Trump administration must resume SNAP benefits and said that plaintiffs who filed a lawsuit were likely to succeed in their claims that the suspension of the benefits is unlawful. I don't know if the law matters if there's no money. You can say it's unlawful all you want. If there's no cash there, how do you put cash in people's pockets? Oh, you print more to make the dollars worth less so that they don't buy as much and prices go up and more people need the benefits so that we have to print more. Oh, it's almost like they're creating the solution for the problem that they're inventing. Another judge, his name is John McConnell, said that the Trump administration must tap its emergency funds to pay for SNAP benefits. The emergency funds, like in case we have to go to war, what's more important? Priorities. If you're prioritizing people being able to go to the store at Walmart and buy their Doritos and ahead of we might need the tanks to roll and the planes to fly if Xi gets a trigger happy, I think you're setting yourself up for some hard times. The people who make that decision are clearly soft men. The second piece, and this comes from the Associated Press, federal judge has now ruled that the Trump administration can't require citizenship proof of federal voting. Colleen Collar-Cotterly, I believe I've talked about before, we'll call her Colleen Cotterly because Collar is her maiden name and the patriarchy always wins. She's from Washington, D.C. She ruled that proof of citizenship is unconstitutional. I think you have to be a citizen to vote. I don't know how that's a usurpation of constitutional powers or a separation of powers. But her quote is, because our Constitution assigns responsibility for election regulation to the states and to Congress, this court holds that the president lacks the authority to direct such changes. So she's quibbling with the executive order. I will note that the lawsuit was brought by the DNC, Democrat National Committee, and various civil rights groups because they want to cheat in elections. They give up who they are every single time. The constitutionality of it is kind of a joke. We've passed voting laws at a federal level. I would think an executive order, which typically is used to execute a law with more certainty. The legislature passes a law, it's signed into law by the president, and there's certain ambiguities in there. The executive order is sort of dictating how a particular law will be executed. I think an executive order to ensure that unlawful voting doesn't happen in a, quote, democracy that the DNC cares about so much is not out of step with the separation of powers. But who am I? I'm just a hobbyist podcaster. I don't know very much outside of what I see in the open source current events of the world, and I like to give you my opinion as always on them. I know it was really dark today. I know it was not the most rosy view of where we are, but nonetheless, on this hobbyist podcast, I like to give you the straight dope where I stand. And for whatever reason it was it just the field trip that I went on with the kiddo? Was it just a recollection about sitting outside that pool at Mar-a-Lago 2 years ago, talking to my buddy Garrett? Whatever it was, that was on my heart. I felt like I really had to bring it to you as a town crier of a hobbyist podcast that I am right now. So we will wrap it up there. I will not, however, leave you without a nice biblical worldview and with a palate cleanse to maybe cheer you up after we've been so dark today talking about these issues. So our first biblical worldview is going to come from Jeremiah, the prophet of woe and lamentation. For I know that plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. Dark times can be ahead, hard times can be ahead, but got to keep on pushing through. There is a plan in place, and we have to keep faith and definitely continue to pursue wisdom along the route, which is what we try and endeavor to bring you so that you will not be caught blindsided. If and when the dark times come, if and when you're out of a job, if and when you're not able to get the transportation that you need, if and when we have some more gain of function, whatever the dark times are, we will always and forever on this program try to get you ahead of the curve so that you're prepared for it and it won't hit you quite as hard. And for today's palate cleanse, at dark times, nation might fall, all these things are tough to think about. Let's cheer us up. What happens when the flag falls? I still have hope, particularly when I see veterans and local citizens looking at what happens when their neighbor's American flag falls. Good stuff. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. Thank you, as always, for joining us. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up. Follow the channel over on rumble.com/amradpod or on YouTube, the American Radicals podcast. You listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, 5-star rating, 5-star reviews. Give us a share at X America News. Plan to be back with you on Thursday, 10:30 Eastern time. And until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.